She cinched a girdle she could barely breathe in, 1955, and stepped out smiling. Half the things in that closet are gone now, and the industry is glad. The post-war closet was a strange, beautiful machine. Every piece had a job, every garment a quiet rule attached to it, and a woman dressed in layers most of us would find unimaginable today. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud. Over the next half hour, we are going to open that closet drawer by drawer and look at 20 things she wore that the fashion industry quietly buried and never wanted back. Start with the girdle, because almost everything else sat on top of it. By 1955, the American foundation garment business was worth roughly $400 million a year, and the girdle was its crown jewel. It was an engineering project worn against the skin, panels of elastic and rubberized fabric meant to give the body the smooth line that the new look demanded. Women stepped into one every single morning without a second thought, the way we put on shoes. The girls who came after looked at that contraption and walked away. As the 1960s arrived and pantyhose and lighter knits took over, the heavy-boned girdle started to feel like a punishment nobody had agreed to. It did its job. It shaped the silhouette the magazines wanted, but it traded comfort for a line. It vanished, but it worked. The fashion industry replaced it with stretch fabric and never looked back, because the new freedom sold far better than the old restriction. Next came the bullet bra, and you would know its shape anywhere. Those firm, conical, stitched spiral cups created the pointed silhouette that defined the decade, sharp enough to be a punchline now. Sweater girls built whole looks around it, a thin knit pulled smooth over that unmistakable architecture. It was structure as fashion, the body reshaped into a geometry that had nothing to do with nature and everything to do with the era's idea of glamour. When natural shapes came into style, the bullet bra had nowhere to hide. The pointed look aged faster than almost anything in the closet, and by the time the softer 1960s silhouette took hold, it read as a costume rather than clothing. The industry quietly dropped the spiral stitching and never brought it back as everyday wear. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, which is that a garment could be both flattering and faintly absurd at the same time. Now the crinoline, the secret engine under every full skirt. To make a skirt stand out the way Dior intended, a woman wore a stiff petticoat of layered net, sometimes starched, sometimes sewn with hoops, and on a good day she owned 3 or 4 of them stacked together. They rustled when she walked, they filled doorways, and they turned an ordinary cotton dress into something that swept across a dance floor like a bell. The crinoline was wonderful and completely impractical, and that was its downfall. You could not sit comfortably in a crowded room, you could not climb into a small car without a fight, and washing a stack of net petticoats was its own afternoon of labor. When the slim sheath dress arrived, the whole scaffolding underneath simply collapsed. The industry kept a thin novelty version for prom dresses, but the everyday crinoline, the one she wore to church and the grocery store, vanished completely. Gloves come next. And they were not an accessory, they were a rule. A well-dressed woman did not leave the house with bare hands, and her drawer held white cotton for daytime, kid leather for cooler weather, and long satin gloves that reached past the elbow for evening. There were unwritten laws about when to remove them at dinner and when to keep them on at a reception. They never wrote it down, but every woman knew. By the middle of the 1960s, those gloves had slipped off and stayed off. As dress codes loosened and casual living took over the suburbs, the daily glove looked formal to the point of fussiness, a relic of a stricter time. Manufacturers who once sold millions of pairs a year watched demand fall away. It survived only at weddings and the most formal galas. An entire daily ritual, the small dignity of pulling on clean white gloves before stepping out, simply disappeared from ordinary life. The Pillbox Hat ruled the early part of the decade, a small flat-topped circle perched at a precise angle. A lady chose a hat the way she chose a handbag to finish the outfit and signal she had thought it through. Milliners filled shop windows with felt in winter and straw in summer, and a woman might own a dozen, one for every occasion. The hat said you were dressed, fully and properly dressed, the moment you stepped outside. Then the hat industry fell off a cliff, and the reasons were ordinary. Bigger hairstyles left no room to balance a hat, cars with low roofs made them awkward, and a relaxed culture decided a bare head was perfectly respectable. Hat factories that had run for generations closed their doors through the 1960s. The pillbox lingered a little longer than most because of one famous first lady, but even her influence could not hold back the tide. The everyday hat was finished. The full slip lived between the woman and her dress, and it was indispensable. Made of rayon or nylon, cut on the bias so it skimmed the body, it kept a thin summer dress from clinging and gave every outfit a smooth foundation. A woman owned several, plain ones for daily wear and a lace-trimmed favorite for special days. She washed them by hand and hung them carefully, because the right slip was the difference between looking finished and looking unfinished. The slip did not vanish overnight, it faded as fabrics changed underneath it. Lined dresses, heavier knits, and casual cottons that did not need a smooth layer all chipped away at its purpose. By the time slacks and easy separates filled the closet, the daily slip was a forgotten step in a routine nobody followed anymore. It was one of those quiet pieces that did real work and got no credit, and when it left, almost no one noticed it was gone. Stockings with a seam up the back were their own daily discipline. Before pantyhose, a woman wore individual stockings held by garter clips, and the seam had to run dead straight from heel to thigh, or the whole effect was ruined. She checked the line in the mirror, asked a friend to look, and sometimes drew a fresh seam by hand when nylon was scarce. Crooked seams were a small public embarrassment, and a straight one was a quiet point of pride. Pantyhose ended the seamed stocking almost the moment they arrived. Once a single garment combined stocking and panty in one easy pull, the fuss of clips, garters, and a perfectly straight seam felt like work nobody missed. By the late 1960s, the seam survived only as a vintage novelty. It vanished, but it worked, in the sense that it forced a kind of daily care most of us would never accept now. The convenience won, the ritual lost, and the seam slid into history. The shirtwaist dress was the workhorse of the post-war closet, the dress she wore to do everything. Buttoned down the front like a man's shirt, nipped at the waist with a belt, and finished with a full or pencil skirt, it carried a woman through housework, errands, and an afternoon visit without a change of clothes. Patterns for it sold by the millions, and a thrifty homemaker could sew 3 or 4 in a weekend from the same paper pattern. The shirtwaist did not die so much as it dissolved into pants. As slacks, capris, and casual separates became acceptable for women at home and in town, the all-day dress lost its monopoly on the ordinary day. The structured, belted version with its careful waist gave way to looser, easier clothes that asked less of the body. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, which is that one good dress, properly made, could quietly run an entire life. The cinch belt was small but mighty, a wide elasticized or leather band that pulled the waist into the hourglass the decade adored. Worn over a dress or a tucked blouse, it could turn an ordinary outfit into a shaped one in a single motion. Women collected them in every color, a red one for a print dress, a black one for a sheath, a wide patent one for Sunday. It was the cheapest way to look expensive. When the silhouette went straight, the cinch belt had no waist to cinch. The shift dress and the unfitted look of the 1960s erased the very curve the belt existed to create, and a tool with no job quietly leaves the stage. It came back now and then as a passing trend, but as a daily must-have it was gone. The hourglass it served was not a body so much as an idea, and when the idea changed, the belt went with it. Underneath the full skirts sat the petticoat slip, a softer cousin of the stiff crinoline, made to add gentle fullness and modesty rather than dramatic flair. It was layered cotton or nylon with rows of ruffles, worn so a skirt did not collapse flat, and a hemline kept its shape through a long day. A woman might own a half dozen in white and pastels, and they peeked out charmingly when she sat or climbed a step. The ruffled petticoat followed the crinoline into the back of the drawer for the same reason. Slim skirts and easy knits needed nothing underneath, and a layer that once felt essential became one more thing to wash and store for no real return. The fashion industry, always chasing the next silhouette, had no interest in keeping the underlayers of a shape it had decided to abandon. They never wrote it down, but every woman knew the day she stopped reaching for it. Saddle shoes belong on this list, the two-tone lace-ups with a contrasting band across the middle, usually white and black or white and brown. Teenagers wore them with bobby socks and full skirts, scuffing them across school floors and polishing them again on Sunday. They were sturdy, sensible, and instantly recognizable, the uniform of a certain kind of all-American girl. Owning a well-kept pair was a small badge of belonging in the hallways of any high school. The saddle shoe walked straight out of fashion when sneakers and loafers took over the teenage foot. As casual culture sped up, the heavy two-tone lace-up looked old-fashioned next to a simple canvas sneaker, and the careful polishing ritual felt like a chore. It survives now mostly as a costume, a shorthand for the whole decade, which is its own kind of fate. The shoe that once marked you as current became the shoe that marks an era frozen in time. The fur stole was the height of post-war evening glamour, a band of mink or fox draped across the shoulders for a night out. It did not have to be expensive to mean something. Even a modest fox piece signaled that a woman had dressed for an occasion. Movie stars wore them on screen, and ordinary women saved for years to own one, storing it in cedar and tissue and bringing it out only for the most important nights. The fur stole faded for reasons fashion alone did not control. Changing attitudes, rising costs, and a shift toward lighter wraps all pushed it out of the everyday evening wardrobe, and the industry that built itself on furs slowly contracted. What was once the ultimate symbol of having arrived became a piece tucked away in a cedar closet, brought out rarely if at all. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud, including how quickly a status symbol can lose its meaning. The capelet was a clever little half cape that covered the shoulders and stopped at the elbow, worn over a dress for warmth and flourish without the bulk of a full coat. It suited the era's fitted silhouette perfectly, draping over a slim bodice and finishing a look for a cool evening. Women wore them to dinners and theaters, a touch of drama that did not crush the careful lines of the dress underneath. It was elegance, scaled down to a single graceful gesture. The capelet drifted out of fashion as the cardigan and the simple coat took its place. A half cape is a specific solution to a specific silhouette, and once the fitted bodice gave way to looser shapes, there was little reason to keep it. Practical outerwear that you could throw on and move in simply made more sense for busier lives. The capelet became a vintage curiosity, the kind of piece you find in an old trunk and cannot quite believe people wore so casually. The petticoat dress, a frock built with its fullness sewn right in, was the workaround for women who hated managing separate crinolines. The skirt came with layers of stiffened netting attached underneath, so a single garment delivered the whole dramatic shape. Mail-order catalogs sold them by the page, and a young woman could order one and look like she had walked off a magazine cover the moment it arrived. It packaged the era's glamour into one ready-made piece. The built-in petticoat dress disappeared with the silhouette it served, just like everything else that depended on the full skirt. When the slim line took over, a dress with netting sewn permanently inside was instantly dated and impossible to restyle. The fashion industry, which had happily sold these by the thousands, dropped them without ceremony. It vanished, but it worked, for exactly as long as the shape it was built around stayed in style, and not a single season longer. The Bolero Jacket was a tiny, cropped jacket that ended at the ribs, worn open over a dress to add polish and a little modesty to a sleeveless bodice. It came in matching fabric for a tailored suit-like effect or in contrasting lace for evening. Brides wore them, office workers wore them, and a woman could transform a summer dress into something church-appropriate with one small layer. It was the era's favorite way to make an outfit do double duty. The bolero quietly slipped away as wardrobes grew more casual, and the cardigan became the easy answer for a chill or a cover-up. A jacket cut so short serves a fitted, formal silhouette, and as those occasions thinned out, so did the bolero. It still surfaces on wedding racks now and then, but as an everyday staple, it is long gone. The careful art of layering for modesty and polish gave way to clothes you simply pulled on and forgot about. The swing coat was a thing of architecture, cut wide and flaring from the shoulders so it floated over the fullest skirt without crushing it. It solved a real problem because a fitted coat would have flattened all that careful crinoline underneath. With dramatic three-quarter sleeves and big buttons, it made even a quick trip to the shops feel like an entrance. Tailors loved it because the cut showed off real skill, and women loved it because it was forgiving and grand at once. The swing coat lost its reason to exist the moment the full skirt did. A coat designed to float over volume looks shapeless over a slim sheath, and the slim sheath is exactly what came next. The fashion industry pivoted to fitted and belted coats almost overnight, and the great floating swing coat was suddenly yesterday. It was a perfect answer to a question nobody was asking anymore, which is the quietest way a beautiful garment can die. Day dresses with matching jackets, the so-called costume suit, gave a woman an instant put-together look that carried her from morning errands to an afternoon luncheon. The dress and its little jacket were sold together and made together, so the colors and fabric matched exactly. Slip the jacket off and you had a softer look for lunch, put it back on and you were ready for anything formal. It was efficiency dressed up as elegance, one purchase doing the work of two. The matched costume suit faded as separates took over and women began mixing pieces freely instead of buying them as sets. The whole point of the matched suit was that everything coordinated for you, but a generation that wanted to pair its own blouses and skirts found that restricting. The industry happily sold more pieces by breaking up the set. The careful, coordinated look gave way to the personal, mixed one, and the matching jacket quietly lost its dress. The dress shield was an invisible little hero, a crescent of fabric pinned or sewn into the underarm of a dress to protect the fabric from perspiration. In an age before easy washing and with delicate fabrics that could not survive frequent laundering, these small inserts saved expensive dresses from ruin. A woman moved them from garment to garment, and a careful homemaker always had a few clean ones ready. It was thrift and care stitched into a single tiny accessory. The dress shield vanished as washable synthetics and easy care fabrics made constant laundering simple. Once a dress could go through the machine without harm, the careful business of protecting it from sweat felt unnecessary, and a generation raised on convenience never learned the trick at all. They never wrote it down, but every woman knew, and then within a single generation, the knowledge was simply gone, an invisible accessory that protected millions of garments, forgotten almost completely. House dresses were a category all their own, simple cotton frocks worn only at home for cooking and cleaning, never seen by visitors. A woman kept her good dresses pristine by wearing a cheap washable house dress for the messy work of the day, then changing into something nicer before her husband came home or a neighbor knocked. There were dresses for being seen and dresses for getting things done, and a careful homemaker never confused the two. The house dress disappeared as the line between home clothes and going out clothes collapsed entirely. When slacks and casual separates became acceptable everywhere, the idea of a special garment just for housework made no sense, and the ritual of changing clothes before company arrived faded with it. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, that there was a quiet dignity in dressing for the work in front of you, even when the only audience was an empty kitchen. The hostess apron was not for cooking at all, it was for serving. A delicate, often sheer and ruffled half-apron, a woman tied on to greet guests and pour coffee. It was decorative armor, a signal that she was the gracious lady of the house. Some were embroidered by hand, others edged in lace, and a woman kept her prettiest ones for parties, far too fine to risk near a greasy pan. It was hospitality you could wear. The hostess apron faded as entertaining grew more relaxed and the formal performance of hospitality eased up. When hosts started serving in their regular clothes and dinner parties turned casual, a special decorative apron just for greeting guests began to feel like a costume from another world. The handmade ones survive in drawers and church sales, tiny works of needlework nobody ties on anymore. It was a small, gracious ritual that the busier, easier decades that followed simply had no room for. The Garter Belt did the daily work of holding stockings up before pantyhose made it obsolete. A band around the waist with 4 dangling clips, it was a practical necessity worn under everything, fiddly to fasten and easy to take for granted. Every woman owned several plain ones for daily wear and prettier ones tucked away, and learning to clip a stocking straight was a skill girls picked up early. It was ordinary, unglamorous, and absolutely essential to getting dressed. The Garter Belt Vanish, the instant pantyhose, offered the same result with none of the fuss. Why wrestle with 4 clips and a separate belt when one garment did it all in a single pull? And by the late 1960s, the everyday Garter Belt was already a relic. It survived only as lingerie, stripped of its original practical purpose entirely. It vanished, but it worked, and it took a whole little ritual of clipping and checking down with it. The Merry Widow was the foundation garment for the most important nights, a long-line corset combining bra and waist cincher in one dramatic piece. Named after a famous costume, it shaped a woman from bust to hip for evening gowns and special occasions, pulling the whole torso into the desired line. It was uncomfortable, undeniably effective, and a little bit theatrical, the heavy artillery a woman brought out when an ordinary girdle simply would not deliver the shape she needed. The Merry Widow disappeared with the rest of the heavy foundation wear as the body itself came back into fashion. As lighter undergarments and a more natural silhouette took over, the idea of strapping the whole torso into boning for an evening felt extreme. It lingered under wedding gowns longest, where structure still mattered, but as everyday special occasion wear, it was gone. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud, including how much engineering went into one perfect evening. Driving gloves and motoring wear were their own small category. Lighter gloves and dusters a woman kept for travel and open-air drives, a scarf to protect the hair, a duster coat over a nice dress, and thin gloves for the wheel made up an outfit for the road. It was the last echo of an older motoring tradition, a touch of practicality dressed up with care, the sense that even a drive deserved its own thoughtful set of clothes. Special motoring wear faded as cars grew enclosed, comfortable, and entirely ordinary. When a car had a solid roof, roll-up windows, and a heater, there was nothing to protect against, and a separate driving outfit became charmingly pointless. The duster, the scarf, the driving gloves all quietly left the closet. It marked the end of an era when travel itself was an occasion you dressed for, replaced by a world where you simply got in the car in whatever you happened to be wearing. The Peignoir Set was bedroom glamour, a sheer flowing robe paired with a matching nightgown, often in nylon or chiffon trimmed with lace. A bride received one in her trousseau, and a woman kept her best set for special mornings and anniversaries. It was beautiful and entirely impractical, made not for warmth but for the simple idea that a woman should look lovely even at the start and end of the day. It was elegance carried into the most private hours. The Peignoir Set faded as comfort took over the bedroom and practical sleepwear won out. As lifestyles relaxed and people reached for soft cotton and easy pajamas, the idea of a formal flowing robe just to look elegant in the morning slipped away. The lace and chiffon survived in honeymoon catalogs, but vanished from the everyday drawer. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, that there was a quiet pleasure in dressing beautifully for no one but yourself. Clip-on hats and half-hats were the tiny perchers of the late part of the decade, little confections of net, feathers, and felt that clipped or pinned onto the hair rather than covering the head. As big hairstyles took over, women wanted something that decorated the dough without crushing it, and these half-hats were the answer. A small veil over the eyes, a spray of feathers at the side, just enough to say a woman had finished her look with proper care. The clip-on half-hat disappeared along with hats in general as bare heads became the norm. It was a clever compromise that bought the hat a few extra years, but once the culture decided a hat was optional, even a tiny one felt like effort nobody required. The little perchers ended up in vintage shops and theatrical trunks. They were the last gasp of a centuries-old rule that a proper lady did not go out without something on her head, and then that rule simply ended. Circle skirts with appliqued designs were a teenage joy, wide felt skirts decorated with poodles, musical notes, or flowers cut from felt and sewn on by hand. The famous poodle skirt is the one everyone remembers, but girls appliqued all sorts of designs, making each one personal. They were homemade as often as bought, a craft project and a fashion statement at once, and they swirled out beautifully over a crinoline at a school dance. The appliqued circle skirt faded fast once the full skirt and the crinoline that held it out went out of style. A wide felt skirt with a poodle on it is gloriously of its moment, and the moment was brief, tied tightly to the early teenage culture of the decade. By the slimmer 1960s, it looked like a costume, which is exactly what it eventually became. It vanished, but it worked as one of the purest expressions of teenage fun the era ever produced. Tap pants and the tap-style undergarment were loose, flared shorts of silky fabric worn under skirts and dresses for comfort and a smooth line. Lighter and airier than a girdle, they were the everyday choice for a hot day or a less formal outfit, and they had a soft, pretty quality with their wide hems and delicate trims. They were the comfortable middle ground in a wardrobe that often demanded discomfort in the name of shape. Tap pants faded as briefer, simpler underwear took over, and the wide, silky short came to feel old-fashioned. Modern undergarments were smaller, lighter, and easier to wear under the slim clothes that followed, and the generous tap pant had no place under a fitted sheath. They survived as a vintage lingerie style, but left everyday wardrobes for good. They were one more soft, comfortable piece quietly edged out by a world chasing a sleeker, simpler line under everything. Sweater clips were a small, clever accessory, a pair of decorative ends joined by a short chain that held a cardigan closed across the shoulders without buttoning it. A woman draped a sweater over her shoulders the fashionable way and clipped it so it stayed put, the little jeweled or pearl ends adding a touch of polish. It was a tiny solution to a tiny problem, the kind of thoughtful detail that defined how carefully women put themselves together. The sweater clip vanished as the shoulders-draped cardigan look went out of style and casual dressing took hold. When sweaters were simply worn and not artfully arranged, there was nothing to clip, and the little chained accessory lost its job. It ended up in jewelry boxes and at estate sales, a charming mystery to anyone who finds one now. They never wrote it down, but every woman knew, and the small art of the perfectly held cardigan slipped away with all the rest. Nylon scarves were everywhere, sheer squares of patterned fabric a woman tied over her hair, around her neck, or through a handbag handle. A scarf protected a fresh hairstyle from the wind, dressed up a plain coat, and could be folded a dozen different ways for a dozen different effects. Women collected them in drawers full of color, and a clever one could transform an outfit with a single knot. It was the most versatile, affordable accessory the closet held. The everyday headscarf faded as hairstyles, cars, and habits all changed together. Enclosed cars meant no wind to guard against, shorter and easier hairstyles needed less protecting, and the careful folding and tying came to feel like effort. The scarf survived as a fashion flourish, but lost its place as a daily essential. It was one of those quiet, practical pieces of know-how, the dozen ways to fold a square of nylon, that simply was not passed down to the daughters who came next. Step back and look at the whole closet at once and a pattern appears. Almost everything that Vanish did so for the same reasons: the move away from the full skirt, the rise of easy synthetic fabrics, the arrival of pantyhose, and a culture that traded careful ritual for simple convenience. The shift was not random. It was a wave, and within about a decade, an entire way of dressing was quietly swept aside. The attic remembers, even when we forget. What strikes you most is how much work it all took. A woman of this era assembled herself in layers, foundation, slip, dress, belt, gloves, hat, each piece with its own rule and its own care. We tend to picture it as glamour, and it was, but underneath the glamour was labor, the daily discipline of dressing properly. There was a real intelligence in it, a system every woman knew by heart, and almost none of them ever wrote down. Consider, too, how much of this knowledge simply was not handed down. The trick of folding a scarf, the right way to clip a stocking straight, which apron was for serving, and which was for scrubbing, all of it lived in the doing, taught mother to daughter in kitchens and bedrooms. When the clothes left, the knowledge left with them, and a single generation later it was gone. They never wrote it down, but every woman knew, and then suddenly no one did. It is easy to romanticize all this, and just as easy to dismiss it, but the truth sits in between. Some of these pieces were genuinely uncomfortable. The heavy girdles and the boned corsets asked a great deal of the body. Others were small works of art and care, the embroidered aprons and the clever little clips. The honest view holds both at once, the beauty and the burden, without pretending the past was either a golden age or a cage. There is a thread connecting nearly all of these vanished pieces, and it is the new look and the full-skirted silhouette it created. The crinolines, the petticoats, the swing coats, the built-in fullness, the cinch belts that made the waist look smaller against all that volume, every one of them existed to serve that single shape. When the slim line replaced it around 1960, the whole supporting cast went down together in a matter of seasons. The fabric revolution did just as much damage to the old closet as any change in shape. Wash and wear synthetics meant no more dress shields, no more careful hand washing of slips, no more protecting delicate garments from every spill. Easy care clothes simply did not need the small accessories and rituals that delicate natural fabrics had demanded. Convenience quietly dissolved a whole layer of the wardrobe, the unseen helpers that kept good clothes alive in an age when clothes were expensive. Pantyhose alone wiped out an entire family of garments in just a few years. The garter belt, the seamed stocking, the careful ritual of clipping and checking, all of it was made unnecessary by one simple all-in-one design. It is rare for a single invention to erase so much so completely, but pantyhose did exactly that. It vanished, but it worked, an entire daily routine of fastening and straightening replaced by a single pull, and almost nobody mourned it. It is worth remembering that these clothes carried meaning beyond fashion. The gloves and the hat signaled respectability. The house dress versus the good dress marked a careful line between private labor and public presentation. And the hostess apron performed a whole role of gracious hospitality. To dress was to communicate, to show you knew the rules and honored them. When the clothes vanished, a quiet language of signals and dignity went silent with them. And yet, for all the rules and all the work, there was real pleasure in it too. There was satisfaction in a perfectly straight seam, joy in a poodle skirt swirling at a dance, pride in a hat chosen just right. These were not only burdens, they were small daily arts that a woman could be good at, that gave shape and ceremony to an ordinary day. We lost the burdens, but we lost some of that pleasure too, and that is worth sitting with. A few of these pieces never fully left, they just shrank into the corners of the closet. The fur stole hides in cedar, the peignoir survives in honeymoon catalogs, the bullet bra reappears as costume, the crinoline lives on under wedding gowns. They became occasion-only, ceremonial, stripped of their everyday lives. It is a strange afterlife for a garment, to survive only as a symbol of itself, brought out once and then folded away for another decade. If you have ever opened a relative's old trunk or a box from an estate sale, you have held these things in your hands without quite knowing their names. A crescent of fabric you could not place, a little chained clip, a stiff layer of net, a tiny feathered hat. Each one was once part of a routine that someone followed every single day. Knowing what they were brings those mornings back to life, the careful, deliberate ritual of getting dressed. When you put it all together, what disappeared was never really just clothing. It was a whole way of moving through a day with intention, a system of small rituals and quiet rules that a generation of women knew by heart and carried without complaint. The fashion industry called it old-fashioned and moved on, but old-fashioned is not the same as worthless. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, and a surprising amount of it is still worth remembering. So the next time you find one of these forgotten pieces tucked in a drawer or hanging in the back of an old closet, do not be too quick to call it strange. Pick it up, picture the woman who reached for it every morning, and remember that she was probably smarter and more intentional about it than we give her credit for. The attic remembers, even when we forget, and that is exactly why it is worth opening the drawers. If this opened a drawer in your own memory, I would love to hear it, so tell me in the comments which of these your mother or grandmother wore and which one you would actually bring back. Subscribe and stay with me, because there is always another box in the attic waiting to be opened, and the next one is full of things they never wrote down but every woman knew. Until then, take care of yourself.